Hello, welcome everyone again to our webinar series for Revolution in Education Congress. We are very excited today to host Susannah Johnson. She will be one of our featured experts at the Congress, both in Cartagena and in Chia in late April. So we are very excited to have her here today. I am Amari Salazar, the head of school at Avante Global School in Cartagena, Colombia. I'd like to go ahead and open it up and let Susannah tell us a little bit about herself, her background, and what brings her to this moment with us here for Revolution Education Congress.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Amaris, for that. My journey to education work and trying to change the world and save the world with education started certainly when I was in school and trying to find a different way to do school myself. And I actually went through the business world first and spent a lot of time managing companies. And by the time I came around to teaching, about 10 years into my career, it really, I knew what the world needed, and I knew what was important. But when I came into the classroom and moved into the teaching world, I was able to really have that understanding of everything about education needs to be about learning how to live, learning how to be a human. And I'm definitely on a long-term campaign to change the name of education to human development. I think that would be great. Everything I do is steeped in critical thinking. But in terms of the actuals of my background in the teaching world, I actually started at a school that most of my career actually was at a school that worked with students who had learning differences, but also high potential. And so there was no shortage of capability and of thinking and of understanding and ideas and curiosity, but regular school didn't work. And so I think I was always destined to be in this role of helping to change education because I was already working in a school where that was the case. And the number one mantra of that school was to meet students where they are. And that has been my reason for working in education ever since I left the classroom. So I was in the classroom and worked over time to move from differentiation into personalization, and then ultimately developing and implementing a 100% individualized curriculum program at the school that I was working at, where students were getting credit for courses they designed themselves. And I was their co-worker in learning, and it really shifted things in terms of how that worked. What brings me to the table, I think, here and in this conversation is the roundabout way that everything is project-based when you get into that kind of a mindset. When you're working towards students being at the center of learning, you have to make space for it. There is no template for that. There is no textbook for that. Everything has to come from this place of like, how can we develop something that is going to be meaningful and impactful, and how can we learn and grow through this process? Left the classroom in 2019 to help all kinds of people all over the world develop this work. I've worked with students in 7 different countries in terms of global cohorts of working on project work while they are also doing individualized learning. And then I also now partner with What School Could Be, which is what brought me to the table today. And What School Could Be is an organization that was born out of Ted Dintersmith's work with Most Likely to Succeed, which is a very well-known movie and a great conversation in terms of what we should be doing. And what's interesting is that the movie is now 7 years old, and yet if you watch it today, it's as relevant as it ever has been, because we still have so much work to do in terms of how to fix education and how to make education more purposeful and meaningful for students. So What School Could Be is a project that is near and dear to my heart. We have a community now where educators can come together, and the community was developed by Sir Ken Robinson and Ted Dintersmith, and it's free for educators all over to be able to collectively share ideas, see examples, get professional development, resources, everything that you need to move education further. And it's been an incredible journey to watch over 6,500 people worldwide come together and have meaningful conversations about how to fix education or what they're doing. And it's we talk often with the What School Could Be world of small steps to big change, and that's true for every human as well as every teacher, of course, every student. So we're really looking at systemic change, but coming from the how can each of us take a small step today to get towards that. So,
well, super exciting. Lots of incredible work. I'm very familiar with both the movie and the book itself, and so I'm super excited to hear about your involvement in that. And what a great kind of ready-made database, if you will, and research base of of great practices, what's going on and what's working, what's not working. And I'm super curious about, the world has changed drastically in the past couple of years. What school could be was long before the pandemic, long before the current crises that are going on, long before a lot of the things that we see are shaping our world. So if you can, tell us a little bit about what you are seeing, hearing, what's working, and how do you know that that's working?
That's a big question.
It is on purpose.
No, I love it though, because it is, because when you just, that last little bit of that question is the most important part of it, because we're trying all kinds of things, and so how do we know it's working is definitely a big part of it. But let me back up a little bit and talk about the school with what, or the journey for what school could be. So most likely to succeed was put together in terms of what we saw from a couple of example schools, and trying to understand the world of education. And then Ted took it around to all 50 states in the United States, and did screenings in communities and had these conversations. And that's one of the main steps of our process and how we look at things, which is mobilizing your community, because you have to have these conversations around education with the whole community. It's not just for parents and for educators, for students, it's for everybody invested in the community, because this is who, we all have a stake in this, right? There's something that comes out of it, which is the humans that graduate our systems and our processes. And so we have to really think about what that means, and we have to come together and decide what we want for our communities first, right? And he did that beautifully. And then What School Could Be, the book, was actually the result of that 50-state tour and seeing what was happening and what was not. And in the community now that has been built out of all these processes and conversations, it is about the examples. And so you're right to ask this question, and I'm glad that you did, because the number one thing I have in my brain at this point, in addition to all these years of watching things and the neuroscience and everything that goes into it, of what we know works for students in terms of dynamic learning and every brain being different and all of those things, what's most powerful is that it's really about coming together as a community and deciding what this is going to look like. So we have examples now, because I get to hear from schools all over the place, from the lone classroom teacher who's trying to just implement something as small as a genius hour, which is a small step towards big change, and letting kids do things on their own, even 1 hour a week. Or curiosity time, 15 minutes a week of just like, what are you curious about? What are you thinking about? These are very small steps towards big change in education. And there are many examples of that, but then there are also examples of people trying to flip the whole system on its head, like at your schools, with the Global Circle schools, as well as other places that I have examples of. There's a woman in Minnesota, Janelle Field, who is doing incredible stuff where she built a micro school, and at the middle school level, right? Which is, we talk a lot about change in education, and it seems really easy to do at the higher levels, but what we really need is keeping the curiosity that comes with young learners going and growing all the way through, right? So she built a middle school that is a school within a school, and just totally started from scratch and flipped everything around. And it's a public school, publicly funded. So there's, a lot of things that you have to adhere to within that. But what it comes down to is, what is this process and how do we do it? In terms of how we know what's working, so our process is loosely mobilizing a community is important, bringing everybody together. Student-driven learning is a huge part of our practice and what we talk about. It has to start with what's best for students and what works for them. Connecting the real world challenges and what's happening in the world to the learning process, and connecting kids to the world at large and making global citizens. Caring and connected communities, of course, we know for sure now that having these emotional connections and building rapport, that matters more for how well we learn and develop than anything else that happens in the classroom. It doesn't matter what methodology you're using. If a kid doesn't feel like they are seen and heard, they are not going to be able to learn well, right? But the final piece of our puzzle is authentic assessments, or what we call evidence of learning. And so when you ask about how do we know what's working, there are so many examples. I like to start from the place of, if kids are happy and they're still asking questions, we've won. That's it. And if that was all we had to go from and all we had to measure, and that was the final piece of the puzzle, we would all be there, because it's so much easier to aim on that than it is to aim on the things that we have created as external measures of how well things are going, right? So there's the one end of the spectrum of I just want happy and curious kids, and the other end of the spectrum where we need to have strong test score learners, right? And so somewhere in between there, we have to find other ways to show evidence of learning to help to get there. What's interesting though is that the schools that are able to find a way to dive in fully and do authentic, deeper learning practices, do project-based learning, things that are student-centered, if after the fact end up having higher test scores. And what's interesting to me about that is that no one is teaching to the test in these schools. And there are examples in many countries and several examples from the US, but realistically, no one in these schools is working towards the test anymore. And they're scared about it because that could change funding, it could change outcomes and processes, but they're doing it anyway because they know it's what's best. And all of these schools that are trying things in really huge ways have actually had increases in test scores, right? There's a school in Colorado, the One Stone School, that is run by students. They're on the school board and they are on the administrative team and they are heavily involved in every decision that happens in the school. And project-based learning rules the roost there, and they focus heavily on the social, emotional, or advisory pieces, and their school is exceeding expectations in the test scores, right? So it's a really simple equation of, if we let the learning happen, the test scores will come probably, but even if they don't, we know that that's not indicative. And that's the other piece of the puzzle, is that anybody who's still in the camp of test scores being the only way through or the only way to show learning, we know now that that's not true. We've been doing data on this for 22 years and it's not working. There is no correlation between high test scores and success in life. There is no correlation between high test scores and making it through college. Everything says there is no indication that doing well on tests helps you to be prepared for life and feel like you can learn and grow and think for your entire life, right? So the evidence of learning for me is that all of these examples of schools that are doing a good thing and making sure that their kids are happy and their scores are getting higher at the same time.
Yeah, Susannah, you are speaking my language and preaching to the choir. So that's exactly our thinking at Golden Circle Schools, is that, something that with all my work with expeditionary learning, I worked with expeditionary learning for 10 years, open to expeditionary learning schools. And one of the things that we worked on a lot, and I continue to work on with boards and funders, is that this is a process. This takes time, and in order to see that benefit, and for many it is test scores, it takes 5 to 8 years, right? And so, and even then, there are other factors, right, that are influencing that. So one of the things that we're looking at a lot now and really thinking about is about how to measure things that are so big and so ambiguous, but yet we know that students need and work a lot with in a project-based learning, such as problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, those global competencies that we talk about so much. Right. So in all of your work and with schools and with different organizations, what do you feel are those top skills that kids need? What are the ones for now and for the future, seeing everything that's happened to us and is continuing to happen in the world, and what are some of those tools and strategies that schools can use in order to provide those opportunities for students?
Wow, another really big question, because it's like, what's the ultimate answer? This is great. For me in the classroom, I always tethered everything I did to critical thinking, and that's where I live and breathe. I live in logic land. There are processes for that. I work with the Foundation for Critical Thinking, which is an international organization, and they do some really great structures, and they've been doing it for a very long time, since the 70s. Dr. Richard Paul and Dr. Linda Elder put together a lot of work on that. And they have processes for teaching those skills, practicing those skills, as well as measuring those skills. But since I've moved out into the world, and also over the past 2 years as we've seen everything turn upside down in the world, I realized that there are so many other skills that are as important or equally important. For instance, there's a school I work with in Florida that is empathy-based. And when I say that that's their that's the school mission and model. I mean, it is everywhere and everything that they do. And I found myself as I was walking around the school saying, how are they going to connect this with math? And sure enough, I went into the STEM lab that they have, which is an outdoor space, and half in and half out, but it's an amazing space. But there are all these things to connect empathy and math that were tools that were visible there, right? And so when we think about what's important for like the skills and the future and what we want for students, yes, I want them to be good critical thinkers, but I want them first and foremost to feel like they matter. Every human needs to feel like they are seen and heard, and everyone needs to feel included, and everyone needs to have the same opportunities. And so we talk a lot with what school could be in terms of how can we be more inclusive in the practices and make sure that we meet everyone where they are to help them move forward, right? That's the big piece of the puzzle. And so when it comes to the other outcomes or what we're trying to do and what are the main skills that I want every learner to have, I want them to be whole humans and feel like they matter. I want them to feel that sense of self that brings them to the space of confidence. But I want them also to feel that curiosity that you speak so highly of, and that I know it's pervasive in just what you're doing and the way that you're presenting about education. We have to maintain this space of we are as humans always learning and always growing, and there's always something new. Even if it's just something simple in your everyday routine life, there's going to be something that comes up that can spark a curiosity. And we have to maintain that in school and in education systems as a means to get to keeping kids interested in learning. With so much of what's coming at them, with the world being so rough these days and so hard to grapple with and to see, but also this huge bevy of information and this power of connection. What I see is what I think a lot of what you're trying to do too is connecting students with the world at large so they feel that sense of humanity and that sense of commonality with what it means to move forward. How do you develop those soft skills and how do you measure those soft skills? And that was, I think, your original question. And try not to answer it, but I have to come back around to it because you're right and it is important. But realistically, if they are showing up to do things without having to be forced into it, that's a good sign that learning is happening organically, naturally, and with a lot of purpose, right? If there's a connection between the things that they're doing that also speaks to anything else in the world, especially I like to use the UN global goals, right? The 17, because it covers a lot of areas and it is a common language that is being spoken globally. And so when students start to work together, they see that list and they can pick out the things that they are most naturally interested in or care about. And you can build your whole schooling around that if you wanted to. You want to work on clean water. There are ways to do your language learning. There are ways to do your science learning, your social studies learning, historical learning, math learning. All of that stuff can be connected to clean water for everybody, right? There are ways to do that. And what that does for me and what that is as an outcome is that there's going to be some practical evidence that comes out of it. You're going to be able to see it. The learning is going to be naturally visible when it's project-based and when it's coming from the students. You're going to be able to see it very clearly because they can articulate what's happening. One of the things we don't do enough of that I think is going to be a good or one of the best steps that we can take towards better evidence of learning beyond testing is getting students to do more of the self-evaluation process and the peer reflection process and sort of making it that feedback loop really big and really pervasive. Like from minute one, second day of learning, where are you? How's it going? And getting some feedback from your peers. So I think that it's really important to think about how can we get students used to that so that learning process is constantly formative, not summative. Summative assessments are the end of learning, right? It's the stop at the end of it. And for me, that never made sense because even if you've gotten to a very high level in a particular area, you've got advanced chemistry and you've understood all of the things and all the principles and the formulas and everything that goes into it. Are you done? Are you ever done learning chemistry? And I would argue that some friends that are Nobel Prize winning chemists will say, no, of course not. You're never done. And ask any professor, anybody who's in the research side of things, and the learning never stops if that's the case. And so if we can get school to a place where students are constantly thinking about not just where is their learning now, but also where is their learning going? What's next for their learning? I had a question on the forms that I used to use with students in their self-evaluation process. It's like, what worked in this project and this, along with all the other evaluative things, what worked in this project, what was not so awesome or didn't work for you, or what was a problem you had to solve, and then where is your new thinking now as a result of this? And it was so interesting to me that students who were at the end of their schooling, so for us, year 12, and they're about to go off to college, they're weeks away or less from graduation, asking them that question and having them have tons of things that they are going to be taking forward with their learning and their thinking. That to me is a strong indication that the learning's not stopping. It's an ongoing thing, and have provoked their thinking. And so they're not done just because they finished any one particular project. They have other places to go as a result of what they learned in that process. So I think there's some strong self-assessment feedback loops, as well as making that learning more visible. Final piece, and then I'll stop on this. I get on a rant a little bit about evidence of learning, but the final piece of the puzzle is that if a student can articulate what they're learning, we're winning. If they can say to their parents, to their friends, to their family members, to anybody else who asks what it is that they're learning, why they're learning it, start to get into what are the purposes of this, what are some perspectives that we're looking at, what were the questions I needed to ask, or the problems that I'm solving. If a student can articulate that, they're learning. That's a way more effective understanding of learning than any test score that we could do.
So very true. Just last week at Avante, we just had our second student-led conferences of the year, and we have little ones. Yeah, we only go till third grade right now. We're adding a grade per year as we grow, and so we start that process at kindergarten. Yeah. So it's pretty amazing. The parents always kind of go into it a little bit skeptical, but when they come out of their first student-led conference, they're like, okay. And most of them have no need to speak with the teacher, because
it changes the game.
It really does. And so I just cannot wait to see those 5-year-olds as 18-year-olds. And after all of those years, like, really, they don't need us at all. They need us there to help facilitate and maybe, arrange some transportation somewhere where they need to go, but they will be driving their own learning.
Yeah, we're thinking partners. We help them process. We're coworkers in their learning process. And once you flip that mindset, and it does take a lot for an educator to go into this space, you have to find a way to set aside your own ego and your own confidence in knowing what it means to be a teacher. And I was scared those first years of a fully individualized classroom. I was, like, it's the week before school starts and teachers are running around prepping, and they're so busy, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do because I don't know what I'm teaching yet. It was so scary, but the minute that they walk in and start to build it for themselves and start to figure out what that is, and students are scared of it too, but they fall into it really quickly and they can articulate it. And I love that you are doing student-led conferences from minute one, because all the things that I talk about, critical thinking and problem solving and self-evaluation and peer feedback, I think all of those things should be happening from the very youngest of ages, and especially student-led conferences and student-centered conferences, because I think a student being able to talk about their learning is so important. And so I love that that's what you're doing. I can't wait to visit and see your school, but it's very important because those 5-year-olds, when they become 18-year-olds, like you said, they're going to be so self-aware and so clear on what works for them for learning, and they'll have so much of a stronger sense of who they are and what they want to do with their lives. They're going to walk out of school with a purpose instead of spending the next 4 years trying to find out what they want to do with their lives, right? We don't start asking that question, what do you want to do with your life, until you're in middle school or higher, but 5-year-olds know, and they have an idea, and they can start to build from that. Like, you think you're interested in this? Great, let's go down that path for a little while and see how it goes for you. And why can't we do that all the way through and make space for all of that stuff? And even as they then get into the higher levels with the testing, why can't they have many opportunities to continue to grow and learn in ways that matter for them? Even if it's only part of the day because you have a school already in place, there are ways to start to infuse those strategies of, like I said, curiosity time or genius hour. But there are lots of little small steps to start to get students to have an understanding of themselves, even if you have a very structured system already, right? How can you dip your toe in the water? For a teacher to try those things in the classroom is great. But also I would back it up even further and say, what about just shadowing a student for a day? If every administrator and principal that I talked to encouraged it and forced their teachers to do one shadow a student day a year or more, it would change their perspective. What's it like to walk through their day? And so, because it gives you that empathy piece that I was talking about, it's naturally part of the process. Now you know where a student is coming from in their day, but also you can see what does it feel like in their whole day and from their eyes, right? And it's that perspective really helps us to understand what it means to learn and to grow, right? So there are ways to start taking these small steps into that process. Another thing I would encourage for people who are really just beginning the journey towards more deeper learning practices and progressive practices, project-based learning, any of that stuff is you can start as simple as having a little bit of voice and choice, right? This is something that we've known for a long time. And yes, students need to be reading and they need to be writing because that is like, human communication and it's advanced the way that we do things in the world, right? So they need to learn how to read and they need to learn how to write. But why do they have to learn to read with only the books that you want them to read? Why can't they choose other stuff? Why can't they do things? I have a teacher that I'm working with yesterday, and she's got a student who's pretty resistant and has trouble because he's got dyslexia and difficulty reading. So for him, he's a complex thinker, but has difficulty reading. And so to increase his fluency, she's just, like, I'm trying to find things that'll be fun or interesting for him. I'm like, well, why don't you ask him and what's on his mind? I'm like, how old is he? He's 15. Okay. Is he about to be driving? Because you know what? Reading a driver manual and like how to drive before you take your driving test.
That's authentic.
It's authentic learning. It's still reading and it's actually purposeful for him. He might be like, oh yeah, I need to do that and I want to learn how to drive, right? And it starts that process and it really changes the game a little bit. Who cares what he's reading if he's practicing reading, right? That's the thing that we can start to think about. There are ways to infuse minor voice and choice into our processes and make that happen. I worry a lot because I know that a lot of, when I walk into a classroom or I walk into a school or even the folks that are watching this conversation, I worry about that teacher that feels like they're ready for this, but they're alone. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of what school could be in our community is that you are not alone. There's 6,500 of us out here already, and we've only been around for a year. So you're never, ever, ever alone. Come and join us, and we've got you. We've got your back 100%. You can come and hang out with me anytime, and I will walk with you through this process and get you there. But also, I bet if you found somebody near you, talk to just even a few other teachers in your school or maybe even nearby schools, you'll find somebody else that can help you like, okay, I want to start to move my process forward, even if I can't do it for my whole school. Let me find a partner in this process. And that's part of our Mobilize Your Community process. It's like, how do you find your own, we call it committee of 10 based on how the system was built in the US, but it's really about your personal or professional learning network. I call it your posse. It's your gang.
Yeah, and you can really build that now globally and through so many different platforms. So that's a really great reminder. I'd like, Susannah, now for you to talk directly now to those parents out there, those parents who aren't as fortunate to be in our school or other schools that already know this and are already working towards that, and who don't really have a choice. It's the school where their child is and is the only one at this moment that they have available to them. So to those parents who know this, who want this, what are some of the questions they should be asking? How can they advocate for their child? And what should they be looking for?
Oh, that's a phenomenal question. And I do love that the parents being part of the conversation is really great. It's so, for a long time, even when I first started teaching 2007, it really was all about how can we keep parents out of the classroom. and I've never been a fan of that. I've always wanted them to be involved. But I think that what's important for a parent to think about is, it's, excuse me, the relationship with the student matters. And so getting to understand how does your student feel in their day? And I know parents are, from 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds, you ask your child, how was your day? What did you learn? What did you do? They may or may not get a lot out of their student, but you have to keep pushing. You have to keep plugging away to understand, first of all, what is it really like? What's it like for you as a student? What's working for you? And how do you feel when you're at school? And then what are you enjoying? What are you learning that's really important for you? Excuse me, I'm going to have this.
Please do. Hydration is important as well.
Sorry. But it's really about like the understanding of what's already happening first. And then if you know that this is the kind of education that you want for your child, but it's not happening, it's coming into these conversations with the teachers and with the school. And the question might start from the place of, what's the school's mission and vision? What are the goals? What does the school want? Because I don't think, if you asked, 10 parents about the school that their kids go to, could you tell us what the mission or vision is of that school? 9 out of 10 will say no, right? For sure. And that's me being generous. I would say 10 out of 10 probably, but 9 out of 10 for sure. But if you ask that question and there's not an answer for it, that's step one of like, well, okay, then like if you don't have a whole school mission and vision, what are you doing with my child, or what's the goal here, and like how can we work towards that? So then what does it become, like what's the reason for going to school? Well, they're going to school because they have to. And then all right, now that administrator really has to think about where are they coming from and what's going on. But it'll start that question and that conversation. The teachers, and being able to have that conversation with the teachers, it's what's working for my student, or when are they happy, when do you see them light up, or what matters for them. And then as a parent, being able to, if the school is not able to provide that stuff for the student right now, how can you start to incorporate that of like, okay, you're doing your math homework and that's there, but what you really care about is rockets and trajectory and how does this, move forward in the world. And so if I'm a parent, I need to then find a way to, kid gets done with homework, and so let's go find some things where we can start to apply this in a different way, in a way that matters for you and that would be something that you care about. Finally, I did mention already the Curiosity and Genius Hour time. Why can't that be at home if it's not happening in the school? I think that's really important to understand, is that we can definitely make space for this 15 minutes of like, what are you curious about? And like, let's set aside time. Let's have this conversation. I spend time with a lot of kids in my life and with friends and family and everybody. And when I sit down, because it's interesting to watch my friends, even when I sit with their students, because they're waiting to see what the educator has to say about how it's going and how I talk to them and what we do. But it's what about this is interesting to you? It's, yeah, you're doing your reading homework, but what did you find a sentence in here that was fun or interesting, or like who is Tim or whoever this person that you're reading about? What's their backstory? How do you just take it just one step further to spark a little curiosity, and then you tell me, what do you want to talk about? What is interesting to you in your day, or what was fun and what did you do? Those are the ways to start that conversation, spark that curiosity. But my number one question for a teacher or a school is, what's your goal? What's your mission? What's your purpose? Because that's now become the purpose for my child. That's a good step for parents trying to help their schools move forward. And then if they don't know, I'll say, well, have you seen Most Likely to Succeed? Because any parent can get their hands on it, as can any school at this point. Certainly if you join the What School Could Be community, you have it at your fingertips. And so, let's watch this. Let's watch this as a community. Put together something in a church, or if your school lets you put it together with the school or just your own house. Let's just do a movie showing and then talk about education. What does it mean to us? What do we want for our future for our kids? And then let's build a portrait of a graduate out of that together, which gives us our North Star, our mission, and our vision. What do we want for our kids? That'll give us the mission statement easy. And so it's a very quick process and step to get just a couple of questions to get people thinking about how they could make it happen right now, simply.
That is a perfect place to wrap up this conversation. Again, the Revolution Education Congress theme this year is Schools of Purpose. And so right. You are 100% right on exactly what we're going to continue to talk about here in Columbia at the end of April. And so I cannot wait to learn from and with you when you're here. And so want to thank you again so much, Susannah, for talking to us a little bit about what you've seen, what you've heard, what you know, and can't wait to see you here in Columbia at the end of April.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited about learning and growing too. And thank you for doing the work and leading a school built around purpose with student voice at the center. It's beautiful. Thanks, Amari.
Thank you, Susannah. Bye-bye.